I want to celebrate with you because you're on the cusp of a giant moment. Red Bull Rampage, for the first time ever, is going to have women riding in the event. There's a full day of riding, which is incredible. And you've done so much to get to this point. But from people on the outside, maybe they just see this as something that got flipped on. And we both know that there's been just a ton of work to get to this point. So I've had a chance to be on the front row for some of that, and I've been watching from afar for the rest of it, and I'm just really excited. I want to give you some shine. You've put in so much effort, but also like I would love, especially for the people that listen to this that are really invested in the outdoor industry, for you to kind of share this whole journey with them and show what it took to get from point A to point B. Um, you're on the cusp, like I said, of this huge moment. How are you feeling right now?
It's been a journey, to say the least, and like a journey that I've been a part of, but also a journey witnessing all these other people that really wanted this dream uh, prior to it being my own dream. And so, kind of taking all of that into consideration and like being in this moment, it's just there's a lot of emotion wrapped up in it, and it means so much. And I'm so excited for the future. And I mean, not just in mountain biking, but for all these like really cool things happening in women's sports at this moment. It's just, I just feel this injection of energy and drive and motivation, and I just want to keep doing cool things.
I mean, it is huge. It's incredible, and like you said, not just for free ride, but for all of mountain biking. Like there's this concept of if you can see it, you can be it, and this is really kicking down the door in a meaningful way for all sorts of new and existing mountain bikers. That this is actually a path forward. This is an option, even if you don't compete in Rampage. This is an entire category of
Mhm.
riding bikes that's now available for you to be a sponsored athlete, for you to create content around, for there to be an audience that's established. And I think just like the men who are competing in this year's Rampage alongside the women, they grew up watching a different set of riders and they were inspired by them, and that got them into it. And so what is the downstream effect of all this stuff is so incredible. And you're right, we're getting a chance to see that across a lot of sports right now, but I'm here today to celebrate the impact of mountain biking.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that a lot of people look at it and maybe they're like, it's just an event, but it means so much more and it represents so much more. And if women, be it in mountain biking or whatever sport, if women have the opportunity to have that platform and to have the opportunity to win in whatever it is at the highest level, there's so much that comes with it. Like that creates a path for development, for career opportunities, for inclusion in events. It creates income opportunities. It creates the actual pay at the event. It creates media opportunities. There's so many channels that funnel into that, and without having that opportunity or that platform, a lot of those opportunities don't exist, and it has a huge impact on those athletes' future.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking about this a lot in terms of the impact on the future of these athletes that are participating. It used to be if you won Crankworks, you won Rampage, you got a contract and you're good to go for a while.
Mhm.
I wonder, do you think it will have as big of an impact post event, or do you think that actually just getting to this point has had a pretty tremendous? I mean, if you look, there's people like Hannah and Casey, Cami, there's a ton of riders that have gotten a ton of sponsorship in the run up to Rampage through your efforts like Red Bull Formation and some of the other jams and events that have gone on. Do you think that post event will be a big inflection, or do you think that the inflection point has kind of already happened?
There has certainly been growth and opportunities on the career side for the women to this point, and I certainly think there will be on the tail end. But I think in terms of pay equity and kind of having some of these larger opportunities, I think that it might take a little bit longer. I wish that wasn't the case, but I feel like that's kind of this next. I don't want to call it a battle. Like I would like to keep it positive, but it's kind of like a next. That's kind of like I something that I personally would like to put energy in towards, and I think part of that's educating this next crop of riders to help be better versions of themselves so that they can have those career opportunities. But I wish that we could just like snap our fingers and it's all going to change. But the realist in me, I don't think that's the reality.
Yeah.
With that said, I think that the the prize purse at Red Bull Rampage is nothing that any of these women have ever seen at any point in their career, and that money is life changing in so many different ways. So that in itself will be huge for them. But I think in the back end on the business side, I think there will be some more work to do.
Yeah,
I hope that I'm
absolutely.
wrong, but I,
Th-
yeah.
it's a giant step in the right direction, but surely the work is not done.
Mm-hmm.
I'm extremely encouraged between Rampage and Crankworks that, the cards are starting to tip in the right
Mm-hmm.
direction,
Mm-hmm.
and just like competing in the event, I feel like the business side of it is sort of something that takes a lot of reps to get,
Mm-hmm.
both the brands understanding the best way to activate and utilize these athletes, as well as the athletes learning how to best advocate for their own business and for themselves and their
Mm-hmm.
careers and stuff like that. It's definitely an iterative process that takes everybody a while,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of what discipline you're in, to sort of figure out. But I'm encouraged by the momentum and the future that is kind of laid out in front of everybody, and even what we've seen so far. So that's sort of what I want to go back to,
Yeah.
is like, let's go back to the beginning. Let's do the
Okay.
rewind. Um, you have been one of the people who's been advocating for women to be in Rampage probably longer than anyone. And when you and I first kind of crossed paths, you were looking for like, how do I get in the door here? And walk me through like where this whole thing started in terms of just where you were and how everything existed.
Basically, I grew up riding the Whistler Bike Park. I've been riding the bike park for over 20 years, and just kind of being in that scene. And the Whistler Bike Park has really like represented so many inflection points within the mountain bike industry as a whole, and there's been so many big moments and evolutions and business deals and all these things just like happening around the Whistler Bike Park. So like having that as a huge part of my experience, like right from the beginning, has helped to kind of inform my entire path forward. And from the beginning, I always saw people dabbling in freeride and doing freeride things, and I was always intrigued by it. Like you look at the Katrina Strand and the Lisa Lefroy and the Claire Bouchard, and then you have all of the guys. You've got Tippy and you've got the Claw, and there's so many people that had such a huge impact, like in that space over that time period. So I guess as um, a younger person in this sport, just kind of witnessing that, um, it always piqued my interest, but it really never felt like there was a space for me. And I was also kind of, at the beginning, I was on this race path because that kind of felt like the future. I was never that great of racing, to be honest, but that was just where I ended up. And I learned so much from racing, and I made a lot of connections, and it really kind of set me on the path for everything else. But um, when I went to Red Bull Rampage for the first time in 2010, things were a little bit more wild west back then. So it was just like there wasn't really a set number of diggers. You kind of just showed up and dug, and you were a part of it. And I went out there, my first time ever going there. I was super terrified, but I was so intrigued, and I was just immediately obsessed with it. It was like the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And I, I remember going there that first time and like walking up the first shelf and just being terrified in every way. But with that, I was just like enamored by it. I wanted to learn it. I wanted to understand it, and I wanted to figure out how to do it. um, and so I left Rampage that year, and I was like, I've always been like into taking notes and everything. So like taking notes of like, oh, like these are the skills that these guys have, and like this is what they're doing, and like this is what makes people, really good athletes out there, and all the notes. And then
Yeah.
I also was like, all right, well, there's no other women really doing it in this space. So how do I learn all these skills? And then B, how can I make myself valuable to a brand so that I could even pursue that as an opportunity? So I basically gave myself 2 years to learn as much as I could. I just became a student of it. So I tried to progress my riding a ton over that time period. But in tandem, I also learned, this is like pre-social media, but I learned photo skills, I learned video skills, I did writing, I did some commentary and posting for Pink Bike. Basically anything and everything that I had an opportunity to do and develop in, I was like, yes, count me in.
That's
And
amazing.
yeah, I was like, I want to do this and I don't know how, but I'm just gonna just be a student and learn everything I can. And so 2012 rolled around, and I went out to Rampage again. And prior to the event that year, I had made this like big proposal of like basically dream scenario. Like, I want to be a free ride athlete, and this is how I'm going to do it. And I sent it all over, and I it honestly, like, looking at it seemed like a long shot, but I believed in it. And so I went out to Rampage that year, and um, I kind of think back to this one moment. It was like this one moment that literally changed the entire, like, my whole career trajectory. But there was this group of guys that had come from Mexico to recruit some of the guys to do they were doing an urban race in Mexico a couple weeks later. And so they asked the guys, and they also asked me. I was the only woman out there digging, and the guys basically were like, oh, you should talk to her and invite her. So they invited me, which was super, super cool. But the guys also knew that I had all these Rampage dreams and that I wanted to do free ride. And those guys had also invited a group of the Rampage guys to come down in like a week's time or two to basically do these live broadcasts, which were there like 5 days of live broadcasts on Televisa, and they were these basically stunts. And I didn't really know what the stunts would entail, but they kind of pitched it as one of the stunts is jumping over a trophy truck on live TV.
Wow.
And, and so they asked the guys, they didn't ask me, but the guys knew, and they're like, Katie, you should ask them if you can be a part of that project. And I was like, I know who's going, and no matter what, I know I can sit on their back wheel and ride whatever they're riding, and I have no idea how big it is, but if it's there, I will do it.
Whoa.
So I like took a deep breath, and my heart was beating so fast, and I walked up to them, and I was like, the guys told me I should come talk to you about this live show that you guys are working on. And they were like, oh, like it's a trophy truck thing, and it was just a thing for the guys I'm sure they said it in a bit of a nicer way, but essentially that's what they told me.
Ooh.
And I was like I felt myself shaking, and I was like, well, I can jump a trophy truck.
That's yes.
And they were like, really? And I was like, yeah, I could jump a trophy truck. And so they're like, okay, we'll talk about it and get back to you. And like a day or so later, they invited me to come down on that trip, and we did the 5 days of live broadcasts, which are still to this day the wildest thing I've ever done in my entire career. And while we were there, Live Cycling had seen what I was doing, and they asked me if I would send them a proposal, and I had my proposal ready, and I sent it to them, and I joined the Live team as their first ambassador, and that set my freeride and ambassador dream. Like, that set the whole course for everything.
Wow. That's incredible. I mean, there's that whole concept of like the harder you work, the luckier you get, right? Like
Yeah.
you put it together, you had it ready to go, and then all of a sudden all the stars aligned. How
It
was
was
the
wild.
How was the trophy truck jump?
Yeah, it was sketchy but awesome. It was myself, Aaron Chase, Eric Porter, um, Jeremy Wytek. Jeremy Wytek built it or helped to
Okay.
build it, and did he build it?
He built a lot of Bentonville for just context for the
Yeah,
listeners. He's built a
yeah,
lot of like the
yeah,
biggest things in mountain biking.
yeah.
So probably the least sketchy thing there was his design.
Uh, there were a lot of really sketchy features, and it was humorous, but it was a really awesome week, and I challenged myself from start to finish, and I'm so happy that I did. And yeah, it was a life changing experience.
That's incredible. That's
And it,
amazing.
and another actually like really cool learning experience on that trip was I on that trip like I was kind of a late addition to it, and they paid all of the guys to ride in that, but they had no intention of paying me to be a part of it. And the guys totally stood up for me and made it so I got paid, which was
As
really
you
cool of
should.
them.
As you
Yeah,
should.
as I
Yeah.
should have.
That's incredible just how you approached, how you followed through and got supported through the
Mhm,
process too, and like I said, you were so prepared for these moments and it was just the universe kind of delivering based on the
mhm,
preparation. So
mhm.
what happened? I mean, how do you build on jumping over a trophy truck in Mexico? I mean, that must have been such a key learning for you just to know like, okay, if I put myself out there, I can make this stuff happen. And what was next? Was it more stuff with Liv at that point, or how do you go from there?
Yeah, I did a lot of uh like media projects with Liv, and a lot of kind of I don't know, I've always been good with people, so showing up at different events and doing talks and slideshows and leading rides, and I was still chipping away at all my free ride stuff, doing photos and shoot like all sorts of shoots and all of that. So those dreams were still alive. And like from the beginning, I told Liv about my Red Bull Rampage dreams, and they were actually in my entire career, they were the very first brand or group of people that ever believed in it. Like they believed in it and me from day one, which was really incredible. And yeah, they really supported and nurtured that dream and gave me the opportunities to develop, which was really cool and so lucky. I feel so lucky and grateful for that entire team to this day. Um, and yeah, in 2015 or 16, I don't know which year it was, but they they gave me budget to go out and film a video, which I had intended to be my Rampage entry video. And I put so much pressure on myself in the making of that video. I was working really hard and training really hard on my bike, and I went out to Woodward and spent so long out there trying to dial in flips on my downhill bike. And I was like, I'm gonna land a flip on my downhill bike out there. And I had all of these goals, and I got out there the first day of shooting on the on this feature that was literally nothing. Like I don't even know that I got my wheels off the ground. It was nothing, and I had a crash, and that dream was over.
Wow. Wow.
It was like I ended up tearing a muscle in my calf, which was kind of like a freak thing. It's still kind of one of the weirdest injuries I've ever had.
Uh-huh.
But regardless, I couldn't ride, and I that was it. Like we didn't get to film the video, and I went home. I was devastated, and once I recovered from that, I had a series of back to back shoulder injuries, which just the dream just died. You know, when you kind of get injured and it just feels like the sport accelerates past you.
Hmm.
It it like in that moment, it felt like it all just kind of crumbled. um which is like so unfortunate, but it was kind of like that dream crumbled for me, but it also it's like I started to shift my focus. Like Casey Brown was starting to put a lot of time out there, and I knew there were other women out there. So while that dream was over for me, I was starting to see that it was like growing for other people, which was obviously like there was like some degree of jealousy. I was like, I want that to be me, but I also, it's like we want to see women in Rampage. Like if not me, it has to be someone or a
Mhm.
group of women. So that kind of, I after having a little bit of time to sit with it, that was really the where it started to flip in my head, and I started to kind of think about, right, like how.
Yeah. Yeah. What needs to be true for this to actually happen, and what are the levers? I mean, I've got
Yeah.
to imagine that even talking about it, even working on these projects, even going to Mexico already started to, in context, try to got a lot of people on bikes and started thinking about this. Casey kind of
Mm-hmm.
coming online and starting to put that stuff out. Like the two of you were
Mm-hmm.
putting this content out, and I'm a big fan of making content and
Mm-hmm.
demonstrating your expertise on the internet for people to really grab
Mm-hmm.
onto. And I've got to imagine the work that you did, after that first Rampage, learning photography, learning videography, writing, all had a downstream effect to get more people on bikes and more people exploring this
Mm-hmm.
idea and helping sort of the groundswell to build to obviously where it is today. But, what was
Mm-hmm.
sort of the next inflection point for you? So you had this injury, you started seeing other people that were also in the space. How did you kind of push the progression and the growth of it from there? What was future?
Yeah. So, I mean, Casey, over that time period, Casey really started to flourish. I mean, Casey's such a better athlete than I ever was or ever could be. She's just like an incredible athlete in every way, on and off the bike. And to see her like get big contracts and to be featured into films and to be included in all these spaces that women hadn't typically been a part of, like that was super groundbreaking and really inspiring. I was so inspired by her, still am.
Same, same.
Yeah, yeah, she's amazing. And yeah, I I think at the beginning, I I was kind of naive in thinking like, oh, I'll just make a video and that's how I'm gonna get into Rampage. Like I think that was, it's, I guess it's a little sad to say I was naive, but it kind of, as I kind of got into it more and more, I realized like this is gonna be a lot harder than I ever imagined. And I think a big part of that is I think people needed to see not just one woman, but not just one. People needed to see not just one woman, but a group of women riding that terrain really well and totally in control and powerfully and with style and strength and all these other things to kind of shift that. And it didn't feel like it wasn't going to happen with something small. It needed to have a serious inflection point.
Mhm.
um,
Absolutely.
yeah. So, um, yeah. So I'm trying to think back. I guess in um, at at the end of 2018, I decided that I was done riding bikes full time. Like I kind of, it was just, you feel like you've done a lot of learning in that chapter of your career, and it's not that I didn't enjoy it, but I just was ready to try new things and grow in different ways. And there was a lot of things that I wanted to do in the industry and spaces that I thought that I could make an impact in. And so, yeah, I basically stopped riding bikes full time. And then I kind of left this blank space, not knowing exactly what I wanted to do, but kind of giving myself the room to figure it out before jumping or committing into anything. I don't know. I'm like a firm believer of that blank space. That blank space is super important for creativity, for making good decisions, for just thinking outside of the box. And when you're kind of backed into a corner or there's so much going on. It's like hard to think clearly, I think.
Yeah.
So I made that space, and at that point in time, I like really started to revisit um, Rampage and think a lot more about it. And then we had a meeting. You were there
Yes.
in,
Yeah.
in 2018 at Red Bull Rampage, and Rebecca Rush, she basically got this group of women. Rebecca Rush got a group of folks together, men and women, all different people, to chat about the future of women in the field. And she really out loud asked the question, why aren't women in Rampage, and how can we get them in Rampage? And I haven't talked about Rebecca Rush at all yet, but she was and she's been such a huge part of my career. But Rebecca Rush, in that moment, she she kind of just like put her foot down and made people listen, I think.
That's fair. That's
Yeah,
fair.
it
Uh,
was cool.
the
You can talk about that. You were there.
I was there in 2017, the year before. I invited her to the event. She was one of my athletes at the time on Red
Hmm.
Bull, and she came to the event. She carried Carson Sorch's bike up to the top of
Yeah.
Rampage. She was helping out there. And at dinner one night, she was like, "Lucy, how come there's no women in this event?" And, at that point, there was a litany of excuses that had been given. But my biggest thing that I said was that there's no pathway to develop competition experience, because
Hmm.
it's one thing to ride Rampage and to make it from top to bottom, but it's
Hmm.
another thing when there's like 8 million people watching you. Like,
Hmm.
even when I do bike events where I'm riding a trials contest or something, I don't ride as well in front of people as I do when I'm filming myself or whatever else. Like, it is a skill set to be able to drop in when somebody points at you. And you
Yeah,
it
totally.
it is high stakes, but it's also, there is a level of experience that needs to be put in place before going on the biggest thing. And so my pushback was like, there used to be women's slope style events way back in the day, like Claire
Hmm.
Bouchard and
Hmm.
Lisa and everybody used to compete in, but it's sort of fallen off. There isn't like a really clear pathway. This is even before Proving Grounds existed as an event.
Hmm.
There's no pathway. There's no way for the women to progress at all to get competition experience in free ride. That's a
Hmm.
problem. And that's probably what's holding them back more than anything. So then, of course, her next question is like, well, how come that doesn't exist?
Hmm.
And then the conversation started in earnest of like, what would need to be true for this to happen? And we continued that conversation into the following year at Rampage. Let's get a roundtable of people together to share stuff. One of the people that I thought was really important to be at that table with us was Michelle Parker,
Hmm.
the free skiing legend, has gone through everything, and she's also a mountain biker in her spare time. But she had some really interesting insight to kind of share, and one of the things that I thought came out of that dinner was this discussion of like, what would a progression session look like? What would a jam format be to pull everybody together, to assemble the community, to help them progress, to bring in mentorship, to get them on the dirt, to just start the process? Because to go from never competing to Rampage is a big gap in
Hmm.
in my mind, at least.
Hmm.
But can we do some stuff that will at least kickstart that process? And that right there, I think, was sort of the birthplace of formation, right?
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So hopefully I represented that
Yeah, no, I
accurately.
100%. Yeah.
And Rebecca had a big hand in also, I mean, she at the time was coming off, just to put her in context, she had just finished releasing Blood Road, which is a
Mhm.
huge film about her life and mountain biking, and so she had a lot of clout within Red Bull at that time too. It wasn't just her pushing on her athlete manager.
Mhm.
She actually went to Amy Taylor, who was like the president of Red Bull,
Mhm.
and got some really great internal support outside of the sports team as well, to really, how do we do this? How do we solve this? But I
Mhm.
guess then you, Rebecca, and a handful of other people really got together to really formulate what this was going to be. Could you talk a little bit more about formation, and like, what is Red Bull formation, and how did it come together, and then how did you kind of follow through with it?
Yeah, so Red Bull formation is basically a progression session to create space and opportunity so that women can develop in the freeride space. So with that, we wanted to give all the women the tools and the resources to grow and develop out there. So that includes like learning how to dig, scouting lines, like figuring out how the terrain works, figuring out the water, like really getting your bearings and learning how to thrive out there. Um, we wanted to help them develop and get to know each other, like connect with one another so that they could really learn and kind of find their path and uh, like figure out how they want to move forward in this space. And lastly, we wanted to develop the media component of this, and we needed this to show up somehow and get the attention of everyone. So there's those three pillars, and that's really kind of at the heart of it. But kind of going back to like how, like, from that conversation moving forward and how it came to be, I we had that meeting, and then things went quiet for a little bit. Like, Rampage ended, and the end of the year comes, and things kind of go quiet. And I'm always kind of tinkering and journaling about things. And there was this one day in it was like, I think it was June 2019. This is still one of the trippiest things in my entire life. I feel like I've used that a couple of times, like something of my entire life today, but like this moment was like pretty wild. I was driving from my house to my mom's house, and a lot of times I feel like I have my best thoughts when I'm driving, and sometimes I'll just like pull over on the side of the road and write things down or ideas down or whatever. And anyway, I was driving from from my house to my mom's house, and I had like this super clear train of thought about like riffing on our conversation from Rampage the previous year of like how progression event would happen and who the riders would be and what it would look like and so forth. And I got to my mom's that day, and my mom and I had planned to make vision boards that day, which sounds kind of cheesy, but I've always made like dream and vision boards my entire life.
I have one too. You're good. You're
Okay,
fine.
okay. So we literally had just got back from the craft store. Like, I had my bag full of stuff from the craft store, and I got a message from Chris Warden, and he was like, "Can you talk?" And I was like, completely out of the blue, I was like, yeah. And he basically brought up, because he had been at that meeting the year prior, and he was like, "We need to do this." And I was like, I literally have a whole notebook of notes I wrote today. And that evening, I made the whole deck with the notes I wrote in the car that day to build the first formation deck.
Wow. Wait, didn't the first formation happen like a couple months later?
Yeah, it happened in September. So
Wow.
this started in June, and yeah, formation happened in September.
That's incredible. Like,
We went
you
from
know, it,
0 to 100.
yeah. Clearly, it had been percolating in your mind of what you
Yeah,
wanted to have, and then you crystallized it, and then you made it within months. That's incredible for
yeah.
that first go. Wow. Wow. Well, so then how did it go? Talk about the first formation. What was that like?
Oh, it was pretty wild. We assembled. I think that one of the things about that first year is that we needed to assemble a group of women that all they were each like really strong riders, but they brought something different to the table, and athletes that I knew that were really versatile and you could kind of put in any situation and they would be okay. So it was a bit like making a recipe and creating that first group. Like, you wanted people that connected with one another, but also had strengths that may be another rider's weakness. So I like crafting that first group was really important. And I had no doubt in my mind that those women could ride that terrain. But we showed up the first day on the OG site, so like the original Rampage site, and there's this kind of warm up line that if you ever go to Virgin, it's like the line that everyone rides. It's kind of, I mean, it's still gnarly, but it's a warm up line. And so I walked up there with them, and I was like, oh, all right, this is the warm up line. And they were kind of like, hell no. And I was like, I promise it's like not that bad. You like just try it. You can kind of work piece by piece. And it like for a lot of them, they hadn't spent time out there, and it was like that's kind of the thing about that terrain is that like there's a bit of like exposure therapy to it. The more time you spend out there, like the less you feel that you're on the edge of a cliff, and you just don't even see things anymore, which is kind
Mhm.
of weird. But showing up there that first day and having that experience, like they were trying to find their bearings and were super overwhelmed. I was like, you'll be fine, just stick with it. And so they did. They rode for a little bit, and then we went out to the site, and they picked lines as to like what they had planned to build, and then ride a few days later. It was quite a condensed schedule, and again they were super nervous, but as each day passed out there, as they were digging, they felt more and more comfortable, and you could totally see them starting to get their confidence and bearings, and here they are like hanging on the side of things and not thinking anything. I was like, all right, it's working.
It's
and
amazing.
and then ride day came, and they all went one by one, and um the lines were like quite a lot lower down. Like now folks are riding from the top, but at that point the lines were probably like a third, 2/3 up, I would
Mhm.
say. So um not like full lines, but still gnarly lines nonetheless. And yeah, they dropped one by one, and pretty much the first thing any of them said was, "Oh my god, that was so easy. Why didn't we build something harder?" Like they couldn't believe how easy and comfortable, and that they had completely underestimated themselves on the terrain.
That's
And
cool.
yeah, it was really cool. Like there were no crashes, no injuries, no sketchy moments. They all just did their thing and like, blew it out of the water. And prior to that point, there were like I think you and Warden were maybe two of the only people that really and well and I won't say that. I would say there were very few people from the beginning that truly believed like that it was possible and that the women would be able to ride that terrain. And then once this kind of came out into the open and people saw what they were doing, like that moment changed everything.
That's incredible. That's it. Like you gotta just see it,
Yeah,
and how
they
cool
looked
to
so
just
good. Like they
yeah.
looked so good riding the terrain.
That was a triumphant moment for a lot of people, that first
Yeah.
formation, and the just getting it out into the world and demonstrating that it's possible, but also like giving the riders that opportunity to get the shovels in the dirt, talk to other riders, be
Mhm.
mentored, build, dig. Like you said, the exposure therapy of the whole
Mhm.
thing helped build that confidence level, the first
Mhm.
rep, as it were, in this whole process. It was such a giant inflection point
Mhm.
from the outside, at least.
Yeah, you just need the time out there. It's and there's a lot to learn. It's like not one of those places that you can just like show up and get it. There's a whole skill set that goes into it,
Mhm.
and you can absolutely learn it, but you have to put the time in there, and you have to have mentorship to really learn it, I would say.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you mentioned this too, but just connecting the athletes together for them to
Mhm.
carry on that momentum post-event, because what I remember about that time was that after the formation went down, then they started collaborating and doing projects and jam
Yeah.
sessions together, and that kinda kickstarted a new level of collaboration and progression post-formation.
Mhm.
Like, formation was a big moment, but then after that, it only continued to grow, right? How did that
Yeah,
feel kind of post?
no, absolutely. I think actually like I think that was a huge so how do I say it? Early on in my career, I think that I operated a bit more like elbows out. Like I was a bit more protective of my space, and it felt like there were limited seats at the table and so forth. And that's kind of embarrassing to admit. But when when Rebecca Rush came into my life and she kind of like swooped me under her wing, she basically taught me lift as you rise, and like the more people, the better. Like if we can all work together and push this forward. We will all have more, have more opportunities, more pay. Like anything is possible if we work together. And that lesson that Rebecca Rush taught me changed everything for me in my career. And it is a huge lesson that I carry forward to this day. And so when we built Formation in 2019, sitting down with the girls that first day and really telling them this isn't about any one individual person. We need to work together, and this is about us collectively, and be cheerleaders, the biggest cheerleaders for one another, and help one another, and share information with one another, and make one another the best athlete that you can make them.
Yeah, that's so cool. Lift as you rise. That's such
Yeah,
a
lift as
great.
you rise.
I like that. I like that a lot. And I think one of the things that Bear Claw was saying when we had that first meeting was like, you can't just depend on Red Bull to do the whole thing. You can't, like,
Mm-hmm.
just because they put on an event doesn't mean the job's done. And
Mm-hmm.
he referenced, there used to be the Bear Claw Invitational. There was just a countless number of events that were actually rider run
Mm-hmm.
because they wanted to get together and jam together. They wanted
Mm-hmm.
to. There was what was that event that used to happen up in Washington? The Gathering. Do you remember that event? It was like
Oh
in
yeah.
January, and they would go on
Yeah,
an
yeah.
indoor motocross track and make dirt
Yeah.
jumps. And because it was in January, nobody else had anything to do, so they'd get together. And then we did an event here in Portland called the Wham Bam Thank You Jam. Like
I
we always
remember
put
hearing.
on like rider events to just pull
Yeah.
everybody together to collaborate and to progress and to ride. And I think um, what you saw from setting the you know the conditions with everybody of like we got to support each other, we got to put this stuff in place, but to Claw's point, like not relying on a single brand
Mm-hmm.
to do everything.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you saw like Hannah had, was it the Blue Steel Jam, and Cammy's got events now, like a lot of the riders from that original lineup all host their own
Mm-hmm.
events now and
Mm-hmm.
invite everybody else to participate,
Mm-hmm.
which then gets them not only progression and everything but also a ton of media
Mm-hmm.
coverage. So it's sort of
Absolutely.
that really launched a lot of other stuff based off of like a single event, which is cool to see just the continuation of all that with or without Red
Mm-hmm.
Bull or with or without Rampage happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we had a really unique opportunity at that point. I mean, there's so many segments of the industry that have been established for so long, and things kind of just are the way they are, and it's quite hard to change them. But we really had the opportunity to create this space from the ground up and create community and make the space welcome to everyone, and to really make this, like, we had the opportunity to craft this segment really truly from the ground up, and I think that that was really cool. And at the bottom of that, just fostering that community, like at the end of the day, it's all about community and people. And if you can connect people and empower people and give people tools and resources and help to bring out the best in one another, like that's what's gonna move the needle.
Absolutely.
So
Was there a moment over the last 4 or 5 years outside of formation that you felt like was another turning point in sort of the development of everything?
um I mean, I think that there's been I mean, so many big moments of people trying things. Do you mean from like a community perspective or like a first perspective?
I think just in general, has there been stuff that's just sort of cemented or that you just felt like was a giant step forward, like,
Mm-hmm.
haha, now you know, this is actually getting the momentum it deserves or the respect it deserves or
Mm-hmm.
the support it deserves. Was there anything that really stood out to you in terms of just really feeling like you're taking another step forward?
Yeah, I think brands investing in the women was huge. The fact that they could actually start to focus on free ride, and that they could really craft this space through media and creating events and um, like building their own careers. Like, though, that having that opportunity has been a huge inflection point, I would say. Like, that really wasn't, with the exception of maybe Casey and Vero, there weren't too many other folks that were able to do that until recently. And if the industry's investing in these women, then yeah, as I said, more media projects, more events, more things are happening, and that continues to progress and drive things forward. I mean, I think you look at events like Dark Fest and the girls doing top to bottom runs at
Yeah,
Dark Fest. You go to Dream Track in New Zealand, and the amount of women that are riding that is like, those jumps are huge, and
they're
there are so
massive.
many women riding them.
Yeah,
Like women I
yeah.
never even seen or heard of, and they're just sending it.
Just casual, just massive
Super
jumps.
casual. Yeah, yeah.
It is cool to think about how many branded helmets, not that that's the marker, of success or anything, but if you look at the lineup for Rampage this year, most of the riders in there have fully branded out helmets from Red Bull or another, you know, beverage company or whatever. I
Mhm.
mean, they're all well supported, or at least have the support of major companies. It's not a grassroots feel necessarily,
Mhm.
which is a big statement.
That is definitely true, but I would say that there's still so much room, so much opportunity there, and there's definitely a huge, especially some of the girls that have been in it longer. There's like quite a huge pay discrepancy between. I I would say looking at the roster for Red Bull Rampage this year on the women, there's a couple of them that can hardly afford to be there. So
Wow.
yeah, so
So
it's
still
not.
early. Yeah, early
Yeah,
days in this
yeah.
development. What is so this year Crankworks opened up soap style for the whole
Mhm.
World Series to the women as well. Has that had any impact? I mean, how do you think about that too? Because it is sort of free ride, but it's like a
Mhm.
different discipline in free ride. And surely the downstream effect of what you did with formation opened the doors for Crankworks as well. Um, do you feel like that has had any impact on what you're working towards right now? Or how do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm obviously heavily involved on like the big bike side of things, but I definitely think it's all like really intertwined. The A lot of the girls are doing well. I would say Robin's the only woman that's competing in both, but in terms of the crossover between at different levels, there's a lot of overlap. So
Mhm.
when I think of freeride, I really think of this broader community, and I definitely feel like I need to help and push everyone forward.
Yeah.
Slope style included, like slope style, and that like that's not my specialty in any way, but I definitely feel that we all have the responsibility to kind of like to we all have the responsibility to look after the scene as a whole, and make sure that those opportunities exist. And um yeah, what happened with slopestyle, I think, certainly put the pressure on for Rampage.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think it's interesting to see already the level of specialization happening, because for a long
Hmm.
time you had to do both slope style and big mountain. And even like when I signed Carson Storch years ago, in his first season, he was still doing both slope style and
Mm,
big mountain.
yeah.
And we actually had a conversation where I was like, "Hey, I think you should lock in on big mountain projects and competing in Rampage. I think specialization is it's the way forward."
Hmm.
And a lot of riders did both as long as they possibly could, including,
Hmm.
people like Semenuk. So it's
Hmm.
interesting to see like there's actually a specialization between the big mountain and the slope style kind of right out of the gates,
Hmm.
which I think is going to progress the sport even faster because they're so locked in. Where a lot of people earlier in this whole progression were trying to do everything, but you could never get great at one thing because you were just trying to
Hmm.
spread your stuff out. I think it's going to be really interesting to see just the progression over even the next couple of years
Yeah.
with like such hyper specialization in each one of the categories.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be wild to watch over the next couple of years. It makes me excited for the future.
Yeah.
With you having had, I mean, you have so much experience in this space. So what do you see as some of the big opportunities and learning points?
Gosh, I'm just so blown away by how much progression has gone down even already. And, going back to the crankwork slopestyle stuff, watching the first event of the year to the last event of the year was incredible to see how much
Mhm.
happened. When you think about the lines that were being ridden first year formation to what I expect to see at Rampage this year,
Mhm.
huge steps forward. Watching the riders that have been a part of that whole journey, I mean, you could see their progression over time, and I think there's something really special there, and I think there's
Mhm.
just so many stories to be told about these athletes, and brands are really kind of getting it. I
Mhm.
think from the outside that they're really starting to see the value in these stories and the relationships with the athletes and what they represent to the
Mhm.
entire sport of mountain biking, because it's sort of like this new territory and it's new stories to be told. I mean, you can only tell a slope style about, um, some of these guys so many times over because it's just been done for 20 years. But
Mhm.
now you have this opportunity to just show like, hey, you get a peek into the beginning of this discipline essentially. And yeah, the skill level is really high. The production quality for everything is really high. There's a lot to work with right now, which is
Mhm.
super, super exciting. It's an interesting time because when the guys started doing Rampage, the guys started doing slopestyle, this sport itself kind of wasn't really ready for
Mhm.
either slopestyle or big mountain. Specifically, the bikes and the technology
Oh,
wasn't even
yeah.
there. You know, like
Yeah.
they were not riding on the right equipment. And now like so much has advanced where we really can focus in on the stories about the riders and not having to worry about the technology as much.
Mhm.
I just think there's something really interesting there, and I think it really is just going to be reps from here on out of, who are the athletes that really take the business side of being professional athletes seriously, who really doubles down on their content game. I see
Mhm.
has her own YouTube channel,
Mhm.
and she's been developing quite a bit. And yeah, the brand's investing in it. There are multiple Red Bull athletes now. Hannah was the first. She
Mhm.
kind of was the first one to establish the category even within Red Bull. But then, I mean, I was there for that, and I was also there for the other athlete managers that got permission from that to say like, oh, we can go deep on that sport now. Great. Well, I've got a German rider that does that. I've got a Australian rider that does that. And
Yeah.
and once it was established as like, oh, we can sponsor athletes in this category that didn't previously exist in most people's awareness, then it made it okay. So that same idea of like if you
Mhm.
can see it, you can be it works not just for the athletes, but also for the brands to say like, oh, Red Bull's
Mhm.
sponsoring this athlete. I guess we should probably have one on our roster and
Mhm.
who's the right fit for our brand. And I think that's where you're going to see a lot of the development is just brands finally coming along for the ride on this and seeing the value, and surely being televised in front of 8 million people is not a
Mhm.
bad look either.
Mhm. If you go back to, like, what you were saying about kind of establishing that segment within Red Bull, how I mean, I guess I don't know if you can speak to this, but I mean, you were pivotal in getting Hannah across the line and helping to establish that segment. Like, I mean, how was that journey for you in terms of making that happen?
Actually, pretty easy. If I'm honest, I actually would have liked to have had some more time to develop the relationship with Hannah, because usually like a Red Bull athlete relationship forms over the course of like a year or two.
Mhm.
And I had gotten to know her. Actually, it was like sort of early days of the pandemic, so we didn't actually get to spend any real time together, which
Mhm.
is really difficult to form a relationship with
Yeah.
any athlete over text message and phone call and, you know, Microsoft Teams or whatever. I would have loved to have actually just spent more time riding with her and getting to know her, but I also knew that she was going to be perfect. She was
Mhm.
super organized. She had a clear focus. She had lots of people from, supporting her, including you.
Mhm.
And she's from Oregon, so that automatically makes her good. um, I mean, I knew she was incredible, and we had formation already in place. So that was a
Mhm.
known entity at that point that Red Bull had invested in women's free ride as an event. So it was easier to get her in the door because there was an established event to say
Mhm.
like, hey, we're already doing this. We should have a marquee athlete that we can actually focus media around, that we can activate within the event. So as you're thinking about, making the most out of this event, what are the assets that you want to have available? Yeah, sure, media, but wouldn't it make sense to have a Red Bull helmet somewhere in there? If we're going to invest in this sport, we should probably invest in an athlete within that sport.
Mhm.
And that's sort of just the way that Red Bull kind of functions.
Mhm.
And so, okay, well, who's the right person? And to be honest, Casey was already with Cliff Bar, had a branded helmet, and she was in Canada, which I had no control over
Mhm.
any of those elements.
Mhm.
And so we're looking for an American rider who makes the most sense, who we believe can be that person who would eventually ride Rampage. And
Mhm.
it was pretty clear that she was one of the top choices.
Mhm.
And again, we had an in. We had already met, and we had
Mhm.
lots of people vouching for her. And so that was really how the whole thing kicked off. You and I were talking before the pod about her helmet presentation,
Yeah.
and one of the things that I remember, aside from the fact that it was happening in 2020 and we were all trying to be 6 feet apart from each other, um, the thing that I remember the most about that moment was Jill Kintner and Michelle Parker were there for that moment. And
Mhm.
it meant a lot because they were also there for the first meeting that we had to talk about what
Yeah.
Red Bull in women's freeride would look like. Those two were big supporters of this direction. But the thing that I loved the most about that moment was Michelle handed the helmet to Hannah and she said, "Don't think of this as pressure. Think of this as validation." And I just like I've delivered and been part of the delivery of the first Red Bull athlete helmet a lot of times at the stage, but that was by far the most eloquent delivery of that moment. And it did validate the effort that she'd made to get there, the impact that she'd already had on women's free ride.
Mhm.
It validated that, and I think it did set her up for success. But like we've been talking about, the downstream impact of the first branded athlete in women's free ride, and who else kind of like came in the door, to follow, and how the momentum has continued to build since then is pretty exciting. And to have a chance to be even like remotely related to some of this stuff has been really special and definitely a point of pride. And I'm so excited about Rampage this year. I'm so proud of all the work that you've put in, and all the riders have put in, and all the people at Red Bull have put in to get to this point. I want you to just tell me what it was like when you got the phone call that this was going to happen.
It was the grindiest journey to get to that point. Uh, and I I had started to hear whispers that something was going to happen, but I also was not about to get my hopes up. I I I was like, I'm not even going to let my head go there until I hear it and it's truth. And until I hear it, yeah, I'm not going to let my head go there until I hear it and I know with all certainty that it's going to happen. And so yeah, I had a call, and the Red Bull team, they basically delivered the news, and here I was like they're sitting at their table, like, and I was projected onto the big screen, and I basically just cried the entire time. And then I proceeded to cry for like 2 days after. I
Amazing.
yeah I yeah it was really really hard, and um I I mean, it was hard. It was hard in the sense of I mean, there was like my own story, which is like just a sliver of it, but witnessing all of these women before me that had so much talent, but their careers ended, and they they never got any opportunity in freeride in any way, and that's so unfortunate. And then you see we've just kind of been watching this talent just rise in the coolest way possible, but also feeling in some ways that without that target, things were going to start to fizzle out a little bit. Like you have to have that target on the map. And I just felt like in some ways we were just like hanging on by a string, and just thinking of other ways of like how it can start to inject energy and like get these women more exposure and do all these other things. But it just felt like we needed that so bad in that moment to give these women validation and be able to really take it to the next level. And it was really cool. The women all they got that. A lot of the women were at Vero Sandler's house in the UK for an event, so they were actually all together when they heard the news, which was really cool. And it was like a flip switched overnight. They now that you like they had that target, and they just started trying tricks left and right, and they basically started to make work backs, so like from now till Rampage, to figure out like this is what they need to do to achieve their goals. And like having that target is so important. And yeah, it means so much to me.
It's incredible. And this entire time, it's never been a sure thing. It was never, from my understanding, never like, oh, well, we're going to do this for 3 years and then this until Rampage. It really, like it was never, they could have said, all right, we're doing formation again and again and again, and that's going to be our women's event. The fact that they really committed and said, no, we're going to make an extra day. It's going to be a women's day. We're going to put all full focus on it. And I think that's a really, knowing how the event runs, knowing how much effort goes into putting that event together and everything else related, the fact that it's not just like, oh yeah, you can ride after the guys are done or whatever, like they're giving the full day, I think is really um really meaningful that you get the same amount of effort into the
Mhm.
event. I mean, such a huge thing to set all those athletes up for success, to set you up for success, to set women's free ride up for success. I'm
Mhm.
really excited about it. And I think people that don't understand how that event goes together, and you and I both know that there are lots of people that don't really understand what goes on behind the scenes, but
It's
to
a
understand
beast.
that event, yeah, it is a lot of effort. Every minute of that event costs like an obscene amount of money to run. And the fact that they're dedicating an entire day to do it right, to give the
Mm.
athletes the best conditions to ride, to have the best filming possible, to, really set them up for the maximum amount of success.
Mhm.
I'm so excited. I can't wait. I was so pumped.
Mhm. Oh, me too. Just feeling that it's on the horizon and it's coming so soon. It's kind of like this crazy anticipation where I feel it's almost like this kind of jacked up energy I've been feeling for months, knowing that it's just looming on the horizon.
Yeah.
And I'm sure for the riders, they feel that so much more. But just from like watching all of them, yeah, from watching from being a part of it, I definitely feel that. But I was actually thinking of one other thing of how to best kind of use an example of what this whole moment has felt like. And it felt like when women were wanting to be a part of Rampage for the first time, it felt like there was just this brick wall in in like yeah, it just felt like there was this brick wall, and no one could quite figure out how to get through it. And I think maybe at first he thought like, oh, you could like climb over the brick wall, and like one person climbs over the brick wall and that's going to change things, which is not the case. But it felt um like I don't know if climbing over the brick wall is the best example, but basically it felt like there was this brick wall, and everyone's kind of chipping away at it, and sometimes those holes got patched, but like the more people that came, whether it's athletes or industry folks or people who are really big supporters of it, they started to chip away at it, and just in so many different capacities, and sometimes those holes were patched and it felt like really big setbacks. But as we've kind of got closer and closer to this moment, we're like seeing daybreak through so many of these different holes. And so when we got the news in June, it just felt like all of these people that have believed in it and have touched it in one way or another for all of these years just finally toppled this wall, and there was daylight and they got the moment. So
Yeah.
it felt like yeah, I mean, so many people work towards it, and maybe people who who have there's just a lot of people that have been a part of it and believed in it. So
Yeah. Yeah. On the Red Bull side, on the mountain bike side, on the event production side, so many people are in favor of this, and it's such an exciting moment. And what a great feeling to get to this point. It's
mhm.
we're recording this on September 12th, so a month from now this event will be in the history books, and then it'll be time to, well, maybe take a day off, just enjoy your success, and then it's time to continue the onward march of developing this sport, this scene, these athletes, and onwards and upwards. I'm so excited for this moment, but so excited for what this moment is going to unlock for so many people. So
Mhm.
I just want to say thank you for everything you've done to get the sport to this point, to get these riders to this point. I couldn't be happier for you and the crew. And yeah, I'm in the front row, just like screaming my head off with excitement. So congratulations.
Oh, thank you. You've been a part of it from the beginning, and you've been such an incredible resource, and you've really believed in it, and you've put a lot into this too. So thank you.
I'm sure
we
you'll do us proud.